Good evening. My name is Charlie Creese and I'm a New Zealander living in Australia. I'm here to help launch a book written by another expatriate, a former resident of your shores, who, in his day, was something of a celebrity. At a certain point, however, he chose to step out of the limelight, make a clean break with the mistakes of the past, and move to Melbourne to start again. This is his story. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you the long-awaited autobiography of Ronnie Biggs.
Andy Pollitt.
Who? Andy Pollitt. Andy Pollitt. Sorry, are we still rolling? Andy Pollitt. Sorry, I seem to have my celebrities mixed up. There's so many of them these days. Indeed, the cult of celebrity is a phrase that's entered the language. What it means, I guess, is that it's that type of individual who, irrespective of what they do, they're just famous for being famous. Now, we may look down on this, but it certainly sounds better than a salaried job. One unfortunate consequence of this cult, however, has been the tendency of these people to write their life stories. And the result has been a series of thin books that are typically short on plot, characterization, and interesting ideas. It's been said before, but it certainly bears worth repeating. The unlived life is not worth examining. Now, climbing presents an interesting contrast. That breed of individual who insists on living life to the max may certainly have a tale to tell, but are they able to tell it and without enlisting the services of a ghostwriter? Well, most elect to give it a try, if only because by the time their career choices have narrowed to outdoor retail or guiding or working in a climbing gym, the suggestion from a publisher that they get it down in words is more than welcome, even if the returns amount to little more than small change. And so, we the armchair pundits had the vicarious thrill of Nanga Parbat pilgrimage, high adventure, or revelations. Books we enjoy not so much for their literary merit, although none is in the least bit amateurish, but because, like a good action movie, they keep coming until the final frame. Life drunk to the dregs, it would seem, is indeed worth examining. And now we also have Punk in the Gym, written by climbing's most celebrated recluse, Andy Pollitt, who, having sworn off the sport himself for more than 2 decades, has now made the rest of us want to keep doing it with his highly individual memoir. And here he comes now. Oh dear.
Well, you did say dress appropriately.
I did.
Excuse me. Good evening, Buxton. Oh, sorry, Kendall. Many thanks to the organisers for inviting us to waffle on for 15 or so minutes. I'm here with Charlie Creese, as you know. Simon Madden from Vertical Life magazine is behind the camera. Thanks, Simon. And I bought this tin of Kendall mint cake over the internet from your local shop to remind us where we are tonight. Shall we go, Chaz?
All right, well, Andy, the book. Look, of all the people I've ever known, none has been so emphatic in their rejection of climbing. You quit the day you did punks, and you never seem to look back. And yet now we have an autobiography. And let's be honest, the publishers didn't come to you wanting an account of what it's like to hold down the same job for 23 years. No, the Andy Pollitt thereafter is the lycra-clad, chain-smoking, heavy drinker who looked like a rock star, and who made a name for himself by doing routes that were not just hard, but dangerous and hard. So why the change of heart? Was it Jerry Moffat's revelations that started the trend, do you think?
Not really. My mum bought me this, Joe Brown, The Hard Years, for my 14th birthday, over the telephone, and Mrs. Brown kindly sent it through the mail before the cheque had even arrived, which was kind of her. Unfortunately, the great man himself didn't sign it, which really adds to my disbelief that he is a real person.
Well, it's obviously not a real name.
Don't say that, he might be in the audience. But on a more contemporary note, Jerry and Grimer's Revelations, for sure. Love it.
Right, well, your book. While the title of the book refers to the Arapiles classic that a lot of people associate you with, it could just as easily have been called Knocking on Heaven's Door. And indeed, the opening chapter starts with an account, not of crushing some bolt-protected sport route, but just the opposite, of being crushed yourself, in fact, by a Welsh trad route. Killed. I remember Mike Law once theorised that it was boldness that distinguished climbing from mere sport, which is a nice way of putting it. But how do you feel about risk-taking now, given that the most dangerous thing you can do at your age is go to the doctor for a checkup?
Classic. Well, that's rather eloquent of Claw, I think, Charlie. But on my 50th, for my birthday present, I went for the old prostate check, only to be told I had a polyp. So I christened it Andy.
Boom, boom. Well, look. Speaking of extreme experiences, it's often been noted when you undergo something like that, when you're charged with adrenaline, you don't really understand too well at the time what's going on. You've been in that place quite a few times in your life. So, while you were writing the book, were you struck by the irony that only an older Andy Pollitt could have given full expression to the younger man's deeds?
Oh, for sure. There's no way in the world I could have written punk 25 years ago. Even with the masterful assistance of Andy Borman, it would have been I cranked on this and I cranked on that and then did a big run out. How good am I? Really wouldn't have made for a decent read.
Maturity's a beautiful thing.
It indeed it is.
It is a beautiful thing because you don't always get it in our little world. Look, a friend of mine, who I would probably describe as an egotistical son of a bitch, he once observed that the climbing scene had more than its fair share of egotistical sons of bitches. But very little of this comes across in your book. Indeed, I'm struck by the warmth with which you describe your contemporaries, some of whom you could scarcely describe as humble.
What, like Johnny?
You didn't hear that. Now look, is it possible that enough death routes in one's tick list is the trump card that allows one to come through that minefield unscathed? I mean, everyone knows in their heart that you can't one-up a long run-out with something that's bolt-protected and hard. That individual has set themselves apart.
Well, I guess only others can judge that, really. I always like to mix it up a bit with some soloing, some long run-outs, bolt-protected sport climbs. You have to have a degree of self-belief and what other people referred to as ego. So really, back then, if it was ego, then I had one as big as the moon, which obviously meant Jerry had one as big as the sun.
Hold on, do you mean our sun and our solar system, or one of the biggest stars elsewhere in the galaxy? So I'm just trying to clarify this, but...
Yeah, but you've got to have a degree of it, and that's why he was the best.
He certainly was. But what you were doing with trad climbing, I mean, it's almost as if we're talking about a different sport. Look, if I was to try and will myself up one of your routes, my body would go into involuntary retreat, which is a condition known as cowardice, or maybe wisdom. But seriously, you could get hurt out there, seriously hurt. And one of the things that strikes me about looking through the photos in the book is how primitive the gear you used looks. Take the peg you used on knocking on heaven's door. Couldn't you have found something a little more trustworthy for such a dangerous route?
No, the little slot determined the size of the little blade.
Well, yeah, but you see the photograph, that peg, it looks like it's had the shit hammered out.
Oh, stop it. I just wish I had a bit of blue tack to hold it in place. And I borrowed it from somebody else anyway, so goodness knows where it had been.
Blue tack, eh? Well, look, speaking of being creative, another thing that strikes one about the book is that the art department at Vertebrate Publishing must have had a lot of fun with it. Because the story of your deeds had already been well recorded on film, long before you ever put pen to paper. Anyone who's ever winced at the sight of their passport photo is not going to like you very much, because there's no doubting that you were highly photogenic. Two of the contributors to the jacket notes of the book were photographers, and this is one of the observations they make. Now, a professional climber is, necessarily, a public climber. So was there a conscious decision on your part to glamorise things for the sponsors, or was it just the era?
A bit of both, I suppose. It was the 80s, remember? Big hair, shoulder pads, lip gloss. And that was just the blokes. Yeah, Ron Hill track suits and tartan shirts, they really didn't make the most attractive attire for glamorous photographs, did they?
No.
And to be fair, Vertebrate went to town on production.
They certainly did. In fact, unlike a lot of climbing books, yours has been sexed up quite a bit, presenting us with an unlikely combination of sporting excellence with all the lows of the so-called rock and roll lifestyle. But look, the more I read about shagging, drinking, and fighting, the more disturbed I am by the thought that back in the caravan at the base of Mount Arapiles, the only people attending the party were you and me. Well, look, there was a lot of fun for sure, but there was also long stretches of boredom when making one's own fun meant basically getting wasted.
Well, for sure. But on the sexed up bit, it was actually sexed down because the legal department said we could end up in prison if we proceed with some of the chapters.
Well, look, if the other inmates had read your book, at least you'd get respect.
True.
But look, on the getting wasted front, it certainly didn't hurt the image that the rest of us had of you. Namely, that behind the dangerous roots, there was a tortured psyche that needed to self-medicate.
Anyone would have a tortured psyche if their last memory of their father leaving home when they're a 6-year-old boy was having watched him being exterminated by a Dalek on Doctor Who.
Well, look, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. Speaking of trauma, I guess we better get down to the crux of the issue. So look, if climbing was your day job, then punks in the gym was your bad 3 years in the office. And in this, your career sort of parallels the evolution of the sport and one of its ironies, namely that the safer it got, the more people found themselves being broken. But do you think that perhaps given your lifestyle choices that sport climbing was a bad career move? No death route ever gave you as much grief as punks, if only for the reason that drinking and partying never impaired your ability to do them.
Another good question, Chaz. But luck runs out if you're, living on the edge like that. Think Derek Hersey, Jimmy Jewell, Paul Williams. All easy solos, but something went horribly wrong. Man, I miss those guys, I tell you. But back to the climbing. I guess my limits were 8A, 8A plus, which is respectable for 30 years ago. But then that thing at Mount Arapiles, that was 2 grades harder again, and I did remarkably well on it, first up. But then it just all went south.
Not as far south as New Zealand, I hope. But
True.
But it did certainly go south, and then it ended up with the rebuilding of the hold with Seeker. Well, I don't propose to make a judgment on that, but one can hardly fail to observe that of all the people who's ever done the route, no one ever came out and said that they wished the hold was smaller.
Well, Jerry was a bit miffed, actually. He thought the hold was visible from the International Space Station, and he'd come all this way.
Apparently that's how they know they're passing over Australia.
Oh,
I've seen that on the NASA website.
Oh, funny, Charlie.
All right, look, the most commonly asked question about you now is, does he still climb? Well, obviously not. In fact, I recall you ringing me up on the 10th anniversary of your retirement saying that you couldn't have done it without me.
I couldn't stay in the scene with you in it, could I?
No, one of us had to go. Yes.
Indeed. But no, seriously, I'd fallen in love with Lindy. I had a job offer with immigration to Australia. It was a no-brainer, really. And I never, ever regretted making that decision. It's a pity they fired me 3 weeks ago. But
So, you're trying to tell us that it took you 3 years to do punks, but it took you 23 years to get fired, and you're trying to tell us that you're a real climber? All right, look, one last current event. Now we have climbing in the Olympics. Now, some people would say this is a new development, but I disagree. Here we have clear proof from a 5th century BC temple that the Greeks, the originators of the Olympics, were well aware of Lycra. This chap is obviously a little miffed with the barbarian trying to steal his route. Oh, and then, as now, there were a lot of people walking around who thought they were some type of god. So Andy, someone like yourself who hails directly from the golden age of heroes, how do you feel about this development?
Well, I actually think it's probably a great thing, particularly for the 0.001% of the youthful elite who will get to compete.
Who can't get a real job.
Yeah, those ones. But no, it should go a long way to raising climbing's profile. So yeah, probably a good thing.
Do you think it'll raise climbing's profile, maybe even to the level of the International Space
Oh,
Station?
stop it.
I mean, that would be higher than any indoor climber has gone before.
Yes, and that's probably our cue to wind it up. So to everyone at Kendall, thanks Charlie, thanks Simon, thanks especially to Andy Borman and Vertebrate Publishing for Punk in the Gym, and to everybody who's read it. Hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. Climb safe, drive safe. God bless. Cheers.